once again to Mr. Sensible's channel. Make yourself at home. Tonight we're going to have a look at Mr. Level Earth Observer, and he is going to demonstrate his extreme Dunning-Krugerousness by telling us about tracking and GPS and totally gets it wrong. First, before we get stuck into that, some thanks to my amazing patrons. With appreciation to my patrons, including new patrons Blair Sadovitz, Brian Rulke, Critical Analysis, David Cooley, Duranku, Jason Downing, John Stock, John Tomczyk, Justin Neal, Lucky Jack Aubrey, Mark Adrisayoko, Mike Apple, Paul M. Rowe, Peter Lennox and Tom C. And my newest patrons, Bjorn Kamitz, Edwulf Sledgeverter, James Holman, Michael O'Quinn and Strongle. Thank you all so very much. So Mr. Level Earth Observer, why don't you tell us about this? Start off by telling us all about tracking. Roll VT.
This is the Global Hawk High Altitude Surveillance Drone. This is the E2 Hawkeye Surveillance Aircraft. This is the E3 Sentry Surveillance Aircraft.
And this is a cheap-ass 20-year-old Canon LS80H calculator. Get on with it.
Rover Defence News' website, one of their latest articles regarding NATO. NATO to upgrade its AWACS surveillance aircraft for $1 billion.
A lot of money.
We get to see the E3 Sentry there, which essentially is an old 707, Boeing 707 aircraft from the 70s with a radar system fitted to it. Unusual looking aircraft.
Well, I think it's a bit more than an old aircraft just with a radar stuck on it.
A NATO airborne warning and control systems aircraft prepares to land at an airbase on September the 8th, 2017 in Konya, Turkey. And of course, that is the aircraft they're going to be upgrading.
Yep, you've got to keep up with the times, have the latest technology, so you're the cutting edge and you have the advantage.
Let's get back to the article. Cologne, Germany. NATO officials plan to spend $1 billion on upgrades to the alliance's fleet of AWACS reconnaissance planes, according to Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. The Boeing-made AWACS planes, introduced in 1982, are slated to remain in service until 2035. Their job is to detect enemy missiles and enemy aircraft threatening NATO airspace.
Sounds like a bargain if we can prevent sneak attacks and missiles dropping on our heads.
Strange that they're willing to spend that amount of money for an air defense system when essentially it's drones and upgrades of 1970s aeroplanes.
Well, the aeroplanes are just carrier systems for the technology. They're not fighter aircraft. They don't have to do all those amazing aerobatics and things. They don't have to travel at fantastic speed. They just got to stay up in the air, carrying all the equipment. They do the job. The important thing is the equipment they carry.
Wouldn't it have been better to spend money on some kind of radar satellite system?
What? Have IQs just dropped a tad?
You wouldn't be losing planes anymore. You wouldn't have these problems. It'd also be fantastic from a military point of view. Wouldn't that make sense?
You fly the aircraft where you want them, whether it's patrolling a border or guarding some naval fleet. The aircraft will be in the right sort of area. To have a satellite there, you'd have to have it in geostationary orbit to watch an area. You can't just move it around. And so if it's in geostationary orbit, it's 20-odd thousand miles away. I'm not quite sure what you think it's going to do.
I mean, to spend $1 billion on upgrades and 5 drones, how much does it cost to launch a satellite? 2 secs, bear with me. So the cost of a satellite launch is between $10 and $400 million. Surely with NATO and the US government, it would make sense to get together and come up with some sort of radar satellite defense stroke navigation stroke location system.
Whoa there, my sparkly little unicorn. You've just suddenly given it 3 uses: defence, location and navigation. AWACS has nothing to do with location and nothing to do with navigation. It's looking out for enemy aircraft and looking out for missiles.
Surely that would make sense, rather than have to rely on old planes.
Again, it's not the plane that's important, but the equipment that it's got on board to enable it to scan. One AWACS aircraft can scan to a distance of, let's see, 220 nautical miles away, and at 30,000 feet flying height can cover 120,000 square miles, which is perfect for its job. You're talking about putting satellites in geosynchronous orbit at 20-odd thousand miles away, and you're talking about radar detecting little aircraft at 20,000 miles away. Now that's insane. And as I said, you can't just move the geostationary satellite around. So if it's not covering the area you want, you're in trouble.
Now we're going to look at the Hawkeye, which is the E2, the smaller of the planes. And one of its main jobs is to work alongside the American Navy. Here we go here. The E2 Hawkeye is a crucial component of all US Navy carrier air wings, which is essentially aircraft carriers, massive boats that carry airplanes and generally travel in a big fleet of boats, okay? So massive aircraft carrier. Each carrier is equipped with 4 Hawkeyes, 5 in some situations, allowing for continuous 24-hour-a-day operation of at least one E2 and for 1 or 2 to undergo maintenance in the aircraft hangars.
That's right, because if you're not defended continually, you're not defended, you're open to attack. The same rationale behind the UK having 3 Trident submarines, so there's always one at sea, while others might be being repaired or other things going on with them.
So essentially, these have to be in the air all the time, guarding aircraft carriers, i.e. big ships and big fleets for the American Navy. The reason so they can detect threats, whether it be from missiles, enemy boats, enemy aircraft. Again, the might of the American government and the American military. You would have thought you'd have a radar satellite detection system in place by now, rather than have to rely on 1960s aircraft, having to fly 24/7, do loop-the-loops around your fleet as they went out to sea.
Well, as I said, from geosynchronous orbit, you're not going to see much with radar. But you haven't suggested they just stick a dish on top of the ships to spot it. What's the advantage of flying at 30,000 feet, do you think? You can see around the bloody curve.
I mean, it's just daft when you look at this stuff and just apply a bit of logic and common sense.
Well, you may argue that. If only you had applied a bit of logic and common sense.
I mean, how many satellites are meant to be around the Earth now? Ridiculous amount. I mean, look how daft that is. You're supposed to have that many satellites around Earth, and there's still not a radar satellite detection system for aircraft from space.
Well, perhaps they just never thought of it. Perhaps you, as a crane operator, should write to President Trump and suggest it. I'm sure that they just not thought of it. Or perhaps it's because you can't do that. Anyway, enough of this. He's going to spend the next 3 or 4 minutes just waffling on how ridiculous it is, how unbelievable it is. We got all those satellites. So let's move on to your next topic, eh? Come on, Level Earth Observer. Tell us about GPS.
What about GPS? What about GPS? Planes are tracked from space, I hear you say.
I don't believe you said that. Perhaps it was just a slip of the tongue. Let's see.
We know a global positioning system, i.e. GPS, is owned by the United States government and run and operated by the United States Air Force. We know this. But we also know aircraft go missing that are supposedly tracked via GPS.
I can't believe you just said that. Perhaps it's just a slip. Did I say this before?
So again, we'll ask the question, what about GPS?
But wait, what about GPS? The aircraft uses GPS to show pilots their position on the map, but this data is usually not shared with ATC.
Right, so the pilot gets shown a location in his cockpit, but air traffic control doesn't get shown his location.
Yes. Where are you going with this?
I'm guessing that it would get shown his location if there was a crash over land.
Well, radar covers the aircraft's position if it's over land, so air traffic control can see where it is. It's not going to see where it is if it's in the middle of the Pacific.
But if it was a crash over the ocean, particularly if it was in the far south, it wouldn't have its location.
Spot on, mon capitaine.
That in itself is just so ridiculous and so suspicious.
Do you understand how an automatic gearbox works? No? So does that make it ridiculous and suspicious? You say that all the time, and it's about all this stuff that you have no idea about. Just because you don't understand it does not mean it's ridiculous, does not mean it's suspicious. Why don't you just do a little bit of research, ask a few simple questions, and you'll find out. And you won't make such a fool of yourself on the internet with each video you publish.
And just shows you how easy it would be to fraudulently fool people.
Well, right now, I think I've got a darn good chance of fooling you with a teaspoon.
Pilot included. You just show him an animation on the screen or a map on his instrumentation, which would be an estimate based on his speed and his flight path, etc. Would be nothing to do with any communication with a satellite.
Because GPS is not communication with a satellite.
Air traffic control haven't got a Scooby-Doo where these planes are half the time.
Well, planes do have transponders that broadcast their position. And of course, a pilot could radio their position. But one of the GPS satellites hasn't got the faintest idea where the planes are. Or anyone walking around with a GPS in their phone. Or you driving with a GPS in your car.
We've seen the US government, the US military, sends out 1960s aeroplanes with radar dishes stuck to the top of it to try and locate enemy aircraft that could be a threat.
Yes, that's not a secret. And stop with your hang-up over the age of these planes.
You would have thought in this day and age there'd be radar, satellites and detection system in place. There isn't, because there's no spinning ball in the first place.
So there we have it. That is the point of your argument. If the Earth was a globe, they would stick up radar satellites. As they don't and have to rely on these old 1960s planes, it's because the Earth is not a ball. How wrong can you be? Because otherwise, why don't they just stick amazing, fancy detection systems above and beyond what they've got on the ships? Why even bother with the aircraft? Because the aircraft are higher. And because they're higher, they can see further around the curve. And the reason they don't use radar satellites is that they would have to be in geostationary orbit, otherwise in a few minutes they're gone and past. And if they're in geostationary orbit, they're 20,000 miles away. And I can't see much hope of a radar spotting a small object such as a fast-moving plane from 20,000 miles away. And then you can't move the geostationary satellite. And GPS, you haven't got the faintest idea of what GPS does, do you? You seem to think that the GPS is spotting each of these aircraft and telling it where it is. That's not how it works. How about some nice fancy Mr. Sensible graphics to try and explain it to you? Okay, here's GPS according to Mr. Level Earth Observer. Here he is, just down there on top of his crane, holding his little GPS receiver. And up above we got several GPS satellites, like this one, just flying around. He seems to think that each GPS satellite is going to know where he is and send a signal to say, Mr. Level Earth Observer, you're there on your crane in the middle of England land. And also broadcast a signal back to crane traffic control and say, Mr. Level Earth Observer's on top of his crane in the middle of England. That is not how GPS works. What you've got instead are several satellites that each know exactly what the time is and exactly where they are. They continually broadcast a signal out in all directions saying, this is the time and this is where I am. This is the time and this is where I am. All day long. So you, sat on your crane, will eventually pick up the signals from this satellite, and from this satellite, each one saying where they are and what the time is. What your GPS receiver does is it then takes that data and using it, it triangulates exactly where you are. And it says to you, Mr. Level Earth Observer, you're on your crane in the middle of England. None of those satellites know anything about you. Your GPS does not tell the satellites anything. Your GPS does not broadcast back to plane traffic control. That does not happen. And as the satellites don't know where you are, they can't tell plane or crane traffic control where you are. So that does not happen. GPS is passive. The satellites broadcast, you receive, your equipment calculates where you are. Simple. Thank you very much. Graphics provided by Mr. Sensible.
It's obvious. It's obvious.
Yeah, it's obvious that we're going to have a hard job identifying whether you or one of your toenail clippings has the higher IQ.
It's all a joke.
Well, you said it, pal. I hope you've all enjoyed this. Remember to like the video. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Just hit mini-me down in the corner. Look forward to seeing you all again. Until then, stay sensible.
Shut up and sit down.